Gentlemen, I have recently gotten into the world of suppressor ownership. Now, initially I was a little bit resistant to the idea because of all the legal hurdles you have to jump through in the US to get a suppressor of your own. But after making the plunge, spending the money, doing the research, I can honestly say that after hunting with suppressed rifles, I am never going to look back. So is hunting with a suppressor really worth it? That's what this video is going to be about. We're going to talk about the pros and cons of suppressor ownership and how it can hurt you and help you in the field, and talk a little bit about my personal experiences hunting suppressed. So let's get started. Now this is the can that I hunt with, shoot with, and use for pretty much every context that you might use a suppressor for. So for those of you that might not know what a suppressor is really all about, I'll give you a quick synopsis and talk about the one that I've selected and why. Suppressors essentially trap the expanding gases moving out of your gun, and they slow them down in this system of baffles on the inside of the suppressor. Typically the front baffle here immediately in front of the muzzle is called your blast baffle, and it's going to be made out of Inconel or some more durable material than the other ones, as it's under the most amount of heat and pressure. By slowing those gases down, it changes the tone of the shot, takes a lot of the noise out of it, and directs most of the concussive blast forward. And usually it has some sort of a flash hider design on the front that then will cut down on your flash as well versus a crowned or braked barrel. These also mitigate a little bit of recoil, but mostly they are for hearing protection. You will never get Hollywood quiet with supersonic ammunition out of pretty much any can, but you can get pretty darn close with subsonic ammunition out of a 300 blackout or an 8.6 blackout if you are running the correct suppressor and the correct platform. I specifically went with the YHM Resonator K from Yankee Hill Machining, and it's been a great suppressor. Hunting specific suppressors are typically going to be more perfected for a hunter's needs, but this one's sort of a jack of all trades, master of none. Very light, very short, 30 cal suppressor that does not give you the same amount of sound dampening that something longer and heavier might, but still does a pretty darn good job considering the price and the length. So with the suppressor out of the way, let's move on to the pros of hunting with a can. And for those of you that don't know, when I say can, I mean suppressor. That's what all the cool kids call them these days. They call them cans, not suppressors, okay? Just so you know, just clarifying. All right, moving on. Now, the main reason to use a suppressor for any context, whether it's hunting, tactical, plinking, whatever it happens to be, is hearing protection. An unsuppressed gunshot is going to land anywhere around that 160 decibel range, and then a suppressor, depending on which one you select, what cartridge you're using, and what bore diameter it is set up with, is going to knock you down to somewhere around the 130 decibel limit. So moving from 160 to 130 is a huge difference, and from the shooter's perspective, all of that sound and gas and energy that's pushed out to the sides from muzzle brake or comes out in a ring on a crowned barrel is then directed more forward and more away from the shooter. Now, you should always still wear hearing protection when you're shooting supersonic ammunition through a suppressor. If you shoot subs, you can get away with it, but supersonic ammunition is still going to create a supersonic crack moving through the air, which is going to damage your hearing. So just be aware of that. But in a hunting situation where, let's be honest, most of us aren't going to be wearing ear pro, it's going to knock down the amount of damage it does to your hearing significantly. As far as the ringing after the shot happens, I shot a deer in West Virginia this year with a 6.5 PRC, 24-inch barrel with a compensator on the front. That shot went off. Things happened fast. I didn't put on ear pro, and I had a long ring in my ear for quite a while after that. The year prior, I shot a deer with a suppressed 308 with this suppressor mounted to the rifle, and I was right back in the game of hearing completely normally after firing a short-barreled 308 with this can on it with no hearing protection being worn at the time. Another pro of a suppressor is that on pretty much every rifle I've put one on, I have seen my overall group size shrink down by at least a little bit or stay the same. It depends on what suppressor you're using. It depends on the profile of your barrel, your cartridge, your rifle, a lot of different things. But typically, hanging a little bit of weight off the front of your rifle can change your point of impact. So you need to look into that before you go just screwing on a suppressor and being like, I'm good, let's go hunting. But it can also deal with a little bit of the harmonic issues inside your rifle that might make it less accurate, and it dampens those fairly well. As I said, it's going to be variable depending on what suppressor you have, what rifle you're combining it with, things like that. But in every single case that I've shot a rifle suppressed and then unsuppressed, the suppressed group was better. You'll also get to appreciate less muzzle rise. A suppressor, while not only adding weight to your rifle, is also going to drop your recoil pretty significantly. Not as significantly as a muzzle brake would. That is sort of a dedicated instrument that presses gas out to the side and really drops the amount of pressure going back towards the shooter, but a suppressor has definitely helped. A crowned barrel is going to recoil more than a suppressor, but a suppressor is going to recoil more than a dedicated muzzle brake. Hey, real quick, if you like what you're seeing on this video, you're probably going to enjoy what you're seeing around the channel itself, and you might even consider dropping a subscription right down below. They help me out a lot, let me know that you guys enjoy the content that's coming out on the channel, and they push me to keep making more and better videos for you in the future. So if you could take a second and hit the subscribe button right down below, it would mean a lot to me. Thanks. Back to the video. Another benefit of shooting suppressed is a smaller amount of concussion coming out of the muzzle of your gun. When you shoot a crowned barrel or a muzzle brake barrel is a really big contributor to this. You get a lot of concussion coming out the sides and then back towards the shooter when you fire your rifle. This presses most of that concussion forward to the point where it is a lot more negligible than a crowned barrel or something similar from a shooter's perspective. For me, I get basically no disorientation when I fire a suppressed rifle versus the mild amount of disorientation that you get shooting unsuppressed. That can help you out in the field if you've got deer moving through your area rather quickly or whatever game you happen to be hunting, and you have to make that shot happen fast, and you need to prep for a follow-up shot fast as well. I can remember specifically the deer that I shot with the 308 in West Virginia. I had to track that deer through some fairly thick stuff before it broke cover and I was able to make my shot. I was able to make my shot, cycle in another round, get back on that animal very quickly and track it as it fell to the ground. Now that's with a short barreled 308 that used to have a muzzle brake on it. I'll roll in a photo of what the actual muzzle brake did in broad daylight. And it was rather disorienting. It wasn't ideal for making quick follow-up shots in a lot of hunting situations. And I think that having a suppressor on it instead of a brake was a huge improvement and made me a better hunter overall. One final X factor that I want to talk about as far as hunting with a suppressor goes is that animals don't quite seem to understand what the tone of a suppressed shot is versus an unsuppressed one. And what do I really mean by this? A lot of people that work in a profession where they are possibly hearing suppressed rifles go off near them very often, I'll let you use your imagination on that, have claimed that it's hard to determine where a suppressed shot is being fired from if it's being fired in your general direction. Something with the warping of the sound waves, how the tone of the rifle changes, it's just harder to identify to humans, let alone the animals that we are firing at. So those guys that have way cooler jobs than I could ever imagine really talk a lot about how suppressor usage can help to not give you away as much as an unsuppressed shot might. Now, I've seen that translate into real life pretty much anytime I fired a suppressed rifle at a game animal, whereas if there were more game animals with them, they didn't quite understand what was going on the same way that they might if I was firing an unsuppressed rifle in the past. The specific story I'm talking about is that same deer that I shot with the 308 a couple of years ago, wherein there were multiple deer on that ridge system that I shot into, and I hit the deer that I was aiming at, dropped it pretty much on the spot, and then I looked up the ridge and there were more deer moving around, but they weren't like turning tail and getting out of there as quickly as I thought they should be. And they didn't even end up leaving until we got up to go towards the deer that we needed to recover at that point. Now I'll leave this video linked in the cards right now, but this year my buddy Colin and I went out for a hunting trip on the same ridge system in West Virginia, and he ended up taking a shot on a deer from pretty close range, about 30-40 yards, with a suppressed 6-arc gas gun. And the animal went down right in front of us, and then 15 minutes later we had more deer moving into the area that I sincerely do not think would have been there had we not been hunting suppressed. Unfortunately, suppressor ownership and suppressor use does have some drawbacks that I think are worth mentioning, and if you are thinking about getting into the suppressor world, I still recommend that you do, but these are some things to take into account. Number one, the legal hurdles of suppressor ownership. I don't really understand why in the US we happen to regulate suppressors so aggressively, whereas in other countries over in Europe, like the UK, these are the things that you can buy over the counter and then they regulate their rifles way too much. But we kind of have it flipped here in America where you can buy a rifle over the counter, but the suppressor itself is an NFA item. You have to send in fingerprints, you have to do a bunch of paperwork, you have to pay an extra $200 tax stamp on top of the price of the suppressor itself, and then you have to go through a waiting period to actually get it to show up at your FFL or shipped to your door. You're also going to want to do a little bit of research into whether or not hunting suppressed is even legal in your state. I believe as of right now, they are legal in 41 states across the country, leaving 9 that are not allowing them for hunting. Shame on those states. But it's just another thing to look into. Make sure that you are cleared in all of your regulations to hunt suppressed if you decide to do so. So that sort of just is what it is. What about infield troubles that might happen when you pick up a suppressor and start to hunt with one? So I mentioned earlier that one of the reasons I went with the Resonator K was for its weight savings, at weighing it at only 10 ounces. As you move into more effective suppressors, they are going to get longer and heavier unless they start using something like a titanium alloy, in which case then they're going to get very expensive. So there's always drawbacks on what you're spending to get better performance. Typically it's going to be actual dollars that you're spending extra, weight or length that's going to be getting in the way in the field. So overall, if you want to run a suppressed rifle, you're going to have to eat the cost of the suppressor, the cost and time that goes into applying for one, as well as the tax stamp, as well as making your rifle a little bit longer and a little bit heavier for all of the pros and advantages of hunting suppressed that we've already talked about. So is a suppressor really worth it for your hunting needs? I think absolutely yes, and I don't think that I will ever go back to hunting with an unsuppressed rifle at this time. The only reason that I would hunt unsuppressed is if I didn't have a suppressor that fit that rifle. In the case of this suppressor, it's a 30 cal can, so I can't use my 350 Legend unless I want to blow everything up. But the benefits of protecting my hearing, making the rifle more accurate in pretty much every case that I've shot so far, less noise pollution in the area that I'm hunting, spooking less game, all of those huge pros that go into suppressor ownership and suppressor use absolutely outweigh the cons of having to carry around the weight and length of a can like this. And even going through the NFA background checks, giving them your fingerprints, all of your personal information, and that $200 tax on top of it, while it is a pain in the neck, it is absolutely worth it, and I would do it all over again. And actually, I guarantee you that I am going to do it all over again when I buy my next suppressor. So thank you guys so much for watching. Do you hunt suppress? And if so, what are you suppressing? What are you hunting with? Let me know down in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel right down below. Helps me out a lot, supports the channel for free. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.